This show is brought to you by Buzzsprout.com, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Tale's End, where we talk about all things relating to books, comics, movies, TV shows, and video games, some relative and some not so relative, in both time and space. Make sure and stay to the very end, as we also run a Q&A month to month, answering questions submitted by you, wonderful long-time Bitches Cabaret fans, and, of course, any other questions that may arise from the Tale's End podcast itself. Again, I'd like to thank everyone who came out and supported the last episode, where I spent around 2 hours doing a relative deep dive into the first 6 episodes of Star Wars Ahsoka, and though a little later than initially intended, we're going to be capping off our Ahsoka coverage with the final 2 episodes of the season, right here, right now. We're going to be jumping right back in, so those who are tuning into the show for the first time, who perhaps need a refresher on Ahsoka Tano's origin story, new and returning protagonist and antagonist on the show, along with getting a general idea of the state, possible intentions, and directions of the Disney Star Wars canon, then check out Radio TANO Part 1, because we dive into quite a lot of that. So, with all that being said, let's get into it. We open with some more of that, what I seem to remember the captions calling soft, ethereal music by the wonderful Kevin Kiner. The words soft and ethereal have been words I've noticed quite a bit in the captions, in this Star Wars show and others, and they usually appear in scenes depicting explorations of force connections, whether that be the method of psychometry, which we mentioned last episode, that involves connecting to an object or place, but also in scenes that show characters meditating and connecting with each other through the force. Although soft and ethereal, this small opening piece also carries a foreboding sense along with it, perhaps indicating that these personal force connections, such as the one that we see Luke and Leia make, for example, in The Empire Strikes Back. You know, the one where Luke is hanging off of the support bars underneath Cloud City, missing a hand, not the one where Luke and Leia make out. And the force connection we see Ahsoka and Sabine make in this episode are possibly no longer safe and perhaps being scrutinized under the Great Mother's dark, watchful eyes, which we find out later in this episode is in fact the case, as we see one of the mothers pretty much hijack or hack into Ahsoka and Sabine's force connection in order to locate Ahsoka's position in the T6 and fire upon her. But we'll get to that. Post-ethereal music, the episode opens on Coruscant, where we see an official disciplinary hearing for General Hera Syndulla taking place. A hearing chaired by Mon Mothma, but mostly spearheaded by that particular pillar of the establishment that I mentioned last episode, the loudest naysayer to the rumours of Grand Admiral Thrawn's return, Senator Giono. I'm guessing he's not exactly happy about the previous and rather public verbal thrashing that Hera gave him a couple of episodes back, and so has likely been preparing this deposition since that meeting ended. He even has the first line of the episode, which I'm willing to bet was a line depicting the tail end of a massive paragraph about what a troublemaker Hera really is, in his opinion. He states that she has no problem bending the rules to fit her personal agenda, which I believe may be foreshadowing for his own character being possibly revealed as an inside man for the resurgence of the Empire, Thrawn's Empire. Hera states,
"My job is to protect the people of this republic. And that is exactly what I was doing."
I see, and you protected the New Republic by ignoring direct orders.
No, I protected the New Republic by ignoring you.
Adore that retort, and also adore how much the show already hates this guy, given that we also hear what I like to think is laughter from some surrounding spectators and a rather obvious smirk from Mon Mothma herself, who then comes to Hera's defense as Captain Carson Teva enters the courtroom. Replying to Carson's objection involving the Imperial conspiracy on Mandalore, Giono later states that Moff Gideon, the main antagonist from The Mandalorian, was a lone warlord who acted on his own. But those who have seen The Mandalorian Season 3 will know that that's not exactly true, given that we see Moff Gideon not only making clones of himself, but also deliberating with what is known as the Pro-Imperial Shadow Council. The council included a man called Gilad Pellaeon, who, for those that haven't read the Timothy Zahn Thrawn novels, was the Grand Admiral's right-hand man during Imperial rule. It's possible that Giono doesn't actually know this, but his heightened defensive stance would seem to suggest he's hiding something. Perhaps the fact that he's been paid off to quell rumours of Thrawn's return, to make sure that the New Republic is unprepared for the inevitable ambush. I was genuinely worried that Hera would be decommissioned. It would have been a ballsy move on the writer's part to go through with it, but I'm a Rebels fan, so I didn't want to see that happen to Hera. She's one of my favourite characters, but I have to admit it would have been interesting. That does not, however, make 3PO's appearance and saving of Hera's ass any less awesome. I was overjoyed that they used 3PO, played again, of course, by the wonderful Anthony Daniels, or at least voiced by him, but we'll get to that in a little bit, to put a stop to this unfair hearing that was taking place. I also love that, as a character, he's justifiably flaunting his importance to the officer blocking his entrance to the courtroom, stating that he does not need to show identification, that the guard should know who he is, and just before he does decide to identify himself anyway, Chancellor Mon Mothma does it for him.
I am C-3PO.
She welcomes him, which warmed my heart. 3PO and Mon Mothma, of course, know each other from their time together in the Rebel Alliance, and Mon is probably one of the few powerful people in the New Republic who understands properly how important he is. Second possibly to Hera herself, not in terms of power, but in terms of personal connection and importance, given that Hera wouldn't actually have joined the Rebel Alliance without 3PO and R2's solid recommendations. In short, 3PO is one of the main reasons that Hera is here at all, and so to see him show up literally like a knight in shining armor and deliver a message from Senator Leia Organa that thereby exonerates Hera was just wonderful to see. And I know Hera did get a couple of soldiers killed on that unsanctioned mission to Cetos, but what's interesting is within that hearing scene that opens the episode, that is not actually a point that's brought up in the deposition. So although that's what I thought they were going to capitalize on, they didn't actually, which was strange. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's Anthony Daniels in the 3PO suit itself. I think that it might just be his voice, which is totally fine considering that the guy's pushing, I think, 80 at this point. Also, the fact that they seem to be using Leia's character silently, having her work behind the scenes to protect the protagonists through messengers like 3PO. It's a very wise choice on behalf of the writing team. It's a workaround that makes sense given that the wonderful Carrie is sadly no longer with us, and allows us as the viewers to input scenes in our own heads of what Leia might have been doing in the background to keep everything afloat. It's a similar kind of principle for Admiral Akbar, whose character does actually appear on the deposition panel in this opening scene, but is silent throughout. Largely also, I would imagine, because the wonderful actor who voiced Akbar, Eric Bowersfield, also passed away in 2016, the same year as Carrie Fisher. Anyway, before Geono reveals himself as a droid racist, which Chopper, who is also present at this hearing, of course has an objection to, we see that Leia, through and with 3PO, are covering for Hera, stating that Leia was the one who actually personally authorized the mission to planet Cetos.
Being regrettably unaware that Senator Ziono had held a vote against such a mission. Without her.
Love that pause. Because 3PO was coming at Geono in a pretty subtle and yet pretty blatant way, suggesting that Geono jumped to conclusions and rushed proceedings without checking with senators who were not present for that original meeting a couple of episodes earlier. On Leia's part, of course, this isn't actually exactly true, and we can see in some New Republic and pre-Resistance novels, such as Bloodlines, it's half-truths and other decisions similar to this that will end up costing Leia a great deal further down the line. We switch to Ahsoka on the T6, training with both of her lightsabers this time, a style and technique reminiscent of her younger fighting style used in the Clone Wars, when she was, of course, training under Anakin. Hayden Christensen returns again, this time in hologram form, talking to Ahsoka through one of the many holo recordings that he made for her during the war for Ahsoka to use as practice. He mentions General Grievous, Count Dooku, and Asajj Ventress. Now, Ventress was a Dathomiri warrior, Dooku's apprentice, or more like, I think the word would be acolyte, who was a regular villain throughout the Clone Wars series and came into contact with General Grievous himself on Dathomir just after rejoining with her fellow Night Sisters and being reinducted into the Witch's Coven. Anyway, back to Anakin.
As your master, it's my responsibility to prepare you, so practice these forms often, or at least more than I do.
These moments between Holo Anakin and Ahsoka and certain lines of course bring to mind some moments from Ahsoka's history, most notably a scene in Star Wars Rebels' second season where Ahsoka watches one of the other recordings with Ezra.
I've made some adjustments to the classic Form 4 techniques that I think you'll find work well against droids and other ranged attackers.
And also scenes from Tales of the Jedi, a series that focuses quite a bit on key points in Ahsoka's life, where Anakin puts Ahsoka through the ringer against the firing skill of the clones in her own division.
This is about life and death. And as your master, I'm responsible for you. If you can hold off Rex and the boys, you'll be ready for anything on the battlefield. Well, yeah, anything with a blaster at least.
This scene in Tales of the Jedi is immediately followed, by the way, by a flash forward to the events of Order 66, where we see Rex and Ahsoka approaching the rest of the clones on the Republic cruiser, ready to put those deflection skills to the test for real. Anyway, what I like about this scene, I suppose, considering the problems I had with the way episodes 4 and 5 played out, is how Ahsoka seems to finally be letting go of her concerns about her Jedi lineage, getting comfortable training with her old master again, using the recordings once again as a source of inspiration rather than pain and fear. We then see a discussion between Ahsoka and Huyang, who expresses his concerns about the odds of them arriving at the right place.
I think the odds are pretty good.
No, in fact, they're terrible. Astronomically terrible.
This, of course, echoing 3PO's original line during the asteroid sequence in Empire Strikes Back.
Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
And since a large amount of this show's story and sequences seem to be told through callbacks and rely on Easter eggs, we might as well mention the parallels to that very asteroid sequence in Empire that more or less immediately follows Ahsoka and Huyang's conversation. They arrive at Peridia, where it seems there is a huge quantity of orbital mines that are surrounding the planet and exploding in close proximity to the arriving Purrgil. The Purrgil, by the way, make the very smart decision and pretty much immediately jump back into hyperspace to escape, leaving Ahsoka and Huyang to flee from the larger quantity of the Soviet MiG-15 inspired fighters that were introduced back in Episode 3. Their official designation, by the way, is the RP-82 Fiend Fighter, and I think they're new to Star Wars. Anyway, after a bit of a chase, Ahsoka and Huyang manage to find cover in amongst the Purrgil bones surrounding the planet, hiding out while they attempt to locate Sabine. Huyang and Ahsoka both performing scans in their own respective ways. Before we get onto the hijacking of the Force connection that I mentioned near the top of the episode, I would briefly like to correct myself on my theory as to who may have built these temples on both Cetos and Peridia. I theorized last episode that the ancient people from a distant galaxy may have been referring to the Rakata, one of the oldest races in the prime Star Wars galaxy that are said to have invented hyperspace travel in terms of being the first to create a technological equivalent, possibly derived from the natural power of the star whales themselves. But, as it turns out, through a Sith Urkatat rune translation that I totally did myself, there are markings that we see on the tower on Peridia that suggest that these ancient people were in fact more likely to be a race known as the Zepho. The quote translates roughly to, "Praise Kujet, ruler of all, may his reign last for all." And then that's where the frame kind of cuts out. Now, I'm guessing that the final word that you can't quite see in the frame is time. That seems to make sense given the recurring themes of the show. And for those who don't know, Kujet was a particularly mean leader of the Zepho. And I have to say it's cool to see more characters brought to life, or rather brought to light, in canon video games, such as Fallen Order, receive an inclusion in this story, as it's Kujet's very tomb that you explore in that game as Jedi protagonist Cal Kestis. This tells us that the Dathomiri and the Zepho must share some kind of ancestral parallel with each other, both being races that originated in this other galaxy, then migrated over to Prime, as there is also a Zepho homeworld that you explore parts of in Jedi Fallen Order that the Zepho most likely settled upon post-migration, like the Dathomiri did on what would come to be known as Dathomir. We see Thrawn learn, or rather most likely confirm, the truth about Ahsoka's Jedi lineage. Thrawn, of course, is one of the few people that managed to put together that Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader, who Thrawn worked with regularly during Imperial rule, were one and the same person, therefore him now realizing that
we are getting to know our adversary, and if she's anything like her master, she'll be unpredictable and quite dangerous. That's why we must control all variables. Put her on a path of her own choosing, so that no matter which direction she takes, we'll always be one step ahead of her.
This, of course, is classic GA Thrawn tactics, letting his enemies escape to give them a false sense of security and thereby most likely able to lure them into a trap of his own design later on. Switching over, we see Ezra and Sabine travelling with the Noti tribe, catching up on all the stuff that Ezra's missed during his exile.
The Empire was defeated.
Battle of Endor.
The Emperor died.
That's what people say.
Sabine's line here, obviously, echoing Poe Dameron's future line in Rise of Skywalker that Oscar Isaac gets way too much shit for. I mean, it's not like he wrote it, but here we go again.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Anyway, we also learn from this catch-up that Zeb is training the new recruits. Zeb Aurelius, of course, was a very important part of the Rebel series. He received a live-action cameo in The Mandalorian and seems to only be mentioned as opposed to appearing in this series, which I find rather strange. I think if there was any show that he was likely to have a larger part in live action, it would have been this one. I would have thought Ahsoka would have been a good starting point, but, maybe we're getting that in Season 2. Anyway, moving on in the conversation, we see that Ezra is surprised that Ahsoka took Sabine on as her apprentice. He recalls the lessons that Kanan, and to a lesser extent Ezra himself, taught her back in the Rebel series. That episode, by the way, is called Trials of the Darksaber and is one of my personal favourite Rebels episodes that was ever created. After this conversation, we see the Great Mothers once again arriving before Thrawn, and we learn the reason in this case why Thrawn called off the orbital pursuit earlier in the episode, allowing Ahsoka to escape so that he could later use the Great Mother's magic to hone in on the connection made between Ahsoka and Sabine, triangulating her position and then launching a surprise attack against her. It is curious to see exactly how loyal the Great Mothers are to Thrawn. They refer to him as our Lord and seem to be constantly available at his beck and call. I have to wonder whether this is a manipulative tactic on the part of the Great Mothers. They are desperate to leave this planet and clearly see the Chimera and the Eye of Sion as their best way out. And so maybe them seeming so subservient to Thrawn, considering the amount of power they possess, is all part of their plan. Anyway, we see Clotho locate Ahsoka, kind of invade this force zoom between Ahsoka and Sabine, kind of like gate crashing a group chat, if you like. The Eye of Sion opens fire, forcing Ahsoka and Huyang out of hiding and towards Sabine and Ezra's location. We see Ezra and Sabine come into distant contact with Baylan and Shin, who are both sat astride howler mounts. Shin's is brighter or paler than Baylan's. He instructs Shin to kill Sabine and Ezra, and then to take her place in the coming Empire. Shin is rather surprised that Baylan won't help, but once again, Baylan has yet another interesting line in response.
Your ambition drives you in one direction. My path lies in another.
I love this line, as it's yet another reference to both the character's namesake. Skoll and Hattie, as we mentioned last episode, refer to the two wolves in Norse mythology that chase the sun and moon. Skoll pursues the sun, the source of light, whereas Hattie pursues the moon, which is a mere reflection of that light source. A reminder, once again, I suppose, that Baylan's quest is somewhat deeper than Shin's, but he also believes that Shin's interest in the power of the returning Empire possibly might actually be the best thing for her in terms of her own personal journey. Baylan's journey, however, in terms of what light source parallel he's searching for, is still unclear. Is he looking for maybe the wellspring of life, which we also covered last episode, the Mortis gods, or possibly Bendu, possibly the Rakata, or something else entirely new that we don't yet know about, which would be equally interesting. Bendu, by the way, if you haven't seen Rebels, refers to the one in the middle, a giant, imposing, physical and yet cosmic force being that represents neutrality, voiced by the wonderful Tom Baker, and who begrudgingly helps Kanan, Ezra, and the rest of Phoenix Squadron a number of times in their original battle against the Empire. One of the most important things that Bendu did, in my opinion, was teach Kanan, who was blinded by Maul in Season 2, to see through the Force, teaching Kanan to see the world around him in a completely different way. Anyway, back to Ahsoka. Following this conversation between Baylan and Shin, we see the Noti tribe, along with Ezra and Sabine, become involved in a pretty awesome chase scene. Baylan and Shin, it seems, have won favour amongst the samurai armoured locals of Peridia that tend to remind me of the Tusken Raiders native to Tatooine. And we see another callback to Rebels when we witness the Noti using slingshots, Ezra's weapon of choice, in the first season of the show before he constructed his first lightsaber under Kanan's tutelage. Anyway, the Noti circle up the caravans upon Ezra's instruction in their native language, this tactic reminiscent of how real-world pioneers would circle up their caravans in order to protect the weaker members of their camp from outside raiders. Ahsoka leaps out of the T6 and does a pretty cool rolling move to distribute the force of her landing. It's kind of a move that I wish she had used earlier in the series, but those who have listened to our coverage of episodes 1 to 6, you'll know what I'm talking about. Ahsoka confronts Baylan once again, and this time we see that Baylan's manipulative tactics are not working this time around. Ahsoka's newfound comfort and time with Anakin batting the manipulation away like it's nothing. Ahsoka, it seems, is visibly far more confident, not just after her time in the World Between Worlds, but also after a great deal of recent practice of the Form 4 techniques. This time she uses both her lightsabers instead of one, calling back to Anakin's lessons, but also reminding us of what Anakin meant by at least more than I do, because of course he lost his first limb while attempting to use that very same form of lightsaber combat against Dooku in the Attack of the Clones. And the next time he would actually end up using two lightsabers would be when he decapitated that very same opponent one movie later, after being goaded to do it upon Palpatine's instruction. Moving back to Ezra, we see Sabine offer him his lightsaber, which was passed down to her, which he refuses, stating, "The Force is my ally." And holy good goddamn, how awesome was it to see a Jedi fighting super confidently without the use of a lightsaber, instead opting for hand-to-hand combat and force pushes. Many people have been saying for years that Jedi shouldn't really need lightsabers if they have the ability of powerful telekinesis at their constant disposal, especially Sith, who can, of course, use lightning as an offensive ranged attack. One of the reasons that Palpatine doesn't use lightsabers, he actually thinks they're pathetic. So it's pretty awesome to see Ezra kicking ass in this way. Iman Esfandi, in my opinion, really deserves praise for his rendition of Ezra Bridger in this show. The way that he positions his stances, his confident half smiles mid-fight, even the way he tilts his head is perfectly reminiscent of Ezra's animated character traits. It cuts between Ezra and Sabine tag-teaming the Peridian Raiders along with Shin, and Ahsoka's rematch with Baylan. Kiner again using some interesting instrumental choices like a peaked-out flute sound to delineate Baylan's powerful shoves and strikes, slightly overpowering Ahsoka but not shattering her confidence. We also see Ezra use the Force to block Shin's attacks mid-strike, showing just how knowledgeable in the Force Ezra has become, and how skilled he is compared to Shin. Shin's blade contracts as Ezra pushes back, which also indicates him overpowering her, as lightsabers are known to channel the energy of the user. Huyang backs up Ahsoka from the T6 while she has Baylan distracted, Ahsoka knowing that Baylan might just be there to stall her arrival. Interestingly, as Ahsoka runs to join the fight and help her friends, the camera lingers on Baylan for a pretty long time, him weighing up his options and perhaps reminding himself of the solo quest that he himself is on. We see him walk away and take his own path, and then we don't see him again until very near the end of the season. Anyway, Ahsoka joins the fight with a pretty cool smirking entrance that makes me happy to see. Finally, I mean, I get that she was on a journey of self-discovery, and so starting out a little more reserved makes more sense so that we can develop her to this point. I just kind of felt like it was a little unnecessary, and so now sudden emoting feels too little too late. I would have greatly accepted Ahsoka being a bit more animated from the beginning of this series, maybe using the dialogue itself to show her character journey instead of the way that the dialogue was delivered. Anyway, Shin admits defeat and legs it from the battle, which means we get to have a lovely reunion between Sabine, Ahsoka, and Ezra. Ahsoka even laughs in this scene, which, again, she's always been capable of, but regardless of that, it was really nice to see these characters together again. Here we are, listeners, at long last, the finale. The Lion, the Witch, and the Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord. It's a pretty cool, and of course pretty inescapable reference to C.S. Lewis's novel, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or Narnia. The episode opens with another awesome shot of the Chimera's underbelly, bisected with the central point of the tower. Atop the tower itself, we see Thrawn instruct Enoch to dispatch 2 TIE fighters to the Jedi's position, not wanting to waste any more resources than he has to, but also wanting to cover his bases. Kind of.
I've watched many an Imperial officer make the same assumptions about the rebellion.
This line could be a nod to quite a few Imperial officers featured throughout the Rebel series, but most likely Thrawn is referring to Governor Price, who seemed to spend a great deal of her time underestimating the skill of Phoenix Squadron. Most of all was when she bombed a fuel depot that did, unfortunately, kill Kanan Jarrus, but allowed Ezra, Hera, and Sabine to escape. But also in the process basically killed Thrawn's TIE Defender project, which went a long way to freeing Lothal, which is where the factory was based, from the Empire's grasp. Thrawn also says,
Even I fell victim to the heroics of a single Jedi. Never again.
This line is most likely calling back to Ezra's sacrifice in the Rebels finale, being banished to another galaxy, etc., but also could be referring to Thrawn's time not just with Darth Vader, but with Anakin as well. The Thrawn Alliance novels shed light on missions that Thrawn not only shared with Vader during the Galactic Civil War, but also with Anakin during the Clone Wars. And it's during this kind of dual timeline story that Thrawn begins to put together similarities between Anakin and Vader. Following that, we see the Great Mothers bestow upon Morgan Elspeth
the gift of shadows.
And the ritual vows and chants are as follows.
You pledge yourself to the sisterhood, to the magics, to the old ways.
Do you abandon your old life for this new one? Your loyalty? Your life?
Now this is taken word for word from Mother Talzin's words to Asajj Ventress during the same Clone Wars episode I mentioned a while back.
Do you pledge yourself to the sisterhood, to the magics, and the old ways? Do you abandon your old life for this new one?
I do.
Your loyalty, your life.
What I like is that each of the questions posed to Morgan Elspeth by the Great Mothers individually mirror the duties of the Greek fates that the Great Mothers themselves are based on. Actropos is the one who asks Morgan about abandoning her old life for this new one, echoing the duty of the oldest Greek fate, Atropos, who cuts the thread of life. And then, your loyalty, your life, is spoken by Lachesis, the middle sister who measures the thread. And finally, Clotho, the one who weaves the thread of life, is the one to actually perform the physical logistics of the ritual. We see Morgan's eyes light up with green fire, marking her face in a similar way to the Great Mothers. Along with the Gift of Shadows, the Great Mothers also bestow upon Morgan the gift of the Blade of Talzin. This, of course, being the same blade that Mother Talzin used on Dathomir when she faced Mace Windu during the Clone Wars. Anyway, moving on from Morgan's ultimately and sadly useless power upgrade, we see Ezra constructing a lightsaber on the T6. This is one of my favourite scenes in the episode, as we get to hear a little bit about Ezra's master's past. From Huyang's perspective, Huyang refers to Kanan as Caleb Doom, the name that Kanan was born with and that he left behind after the events of Order 66 and the death of his master. And Huyang refers to Caleb as shy and unaware of himself, again shedding light on how tough it must have been to be a youngling during the Clone Wars. Ezra also has a pretty funny meta line about a certain lightsaber part.
No, that's not gonna work. Look.
Not going to work? What are you talking about?
The blade emitter's too narrow.
Now look here, I have been teaching younglings how to construct lightsabers longer than you've been alive.
That's great.
This possibly referring to the amount of complaints issued to Disney that the animated blades depicted in the Rebel series were slightly too thin. This would be the third lightsaber constructed by Ezra, the first being a cool dual-purpose lightsaber/stun blaster with a blue blade. Then, of course, the green lightsaber he uses more throughout the Rebel series that he later hands off to Sabine in the finale, and now we're circling back to blue, which must mean that Huyang must just have a bunch of kyber crystals in a cupboard somewhere, along with a specific blade emitter, one of two, the other being the one that Kanan used for his lightsaber throughout the Rebels series. Everything therefore kind of coming full circle here, I guess.
I had two of those. Kanan took the one, the other I held onto in case he ever needed it. It is proper that you should have it.
Thank you, Huyang.
Huyang then reveals to Ezra that Ahsoka decided not to train Sabine due to Sabine possibly following the path for the wrong reasons. And this is when we also officially learn what happened to Sabine's family on Mandalore.
At the end of the war, the Empire purged the entire surface of the planet, killing hundreds of thousands.
Your family?
We're all lost, sadly.
This is referring to what is known as the Night of 1,000 Tears, and we hear mention of this event in the Mandalorian Season 1 finale, and then we actually get shown the bombing of Mandalore during the Book of Boba Fett. Moff Gideon, who we previously mentioned was the one spearheading this attack, which possibly occurred just after the destruction of the second Death Star, but before the final battle on the planet Jakku. You could argue that we, the audience, are only learning about this now because it's being recounted to Ezra, who of course missed all of these events, but I would argue that this piece of information, which does not work as a sudden mid-finale exposition dump reveal, by the way, would have gone a long way to improving or explaining the earlier dynamic between Sabine and Ahsoka and why both characters seemed, at least initially seemed, to be constructed from wood. I get that they were trying to do the unspoken tragedy thing, but for me, it just didn't come across clearly enough. It didn't come across as unspoken tragedy, just unspoken nothing. Maybe just having mere hints of Sabine losing her blood family throughout the show, as opposed to it being dropped on us in the series finale, would have helped clarify their dynamic in earlier episodes, or of course, using brief tragic flashbacks, like I keep mentioning, that show Sabine learning of the death of her parents, the sacking of her home planet, or perhaps dreaming about either, would have sold me more on both Sabine and Ahsoka's attitudes earlier in the series. And it means that Huyang recounting it verbally to Ezra after the fact still makes sense, as we wouldn't have all of the logistical info initially fed to us through these extra flashbacks that I am just imagining and I just wish existed. And also, I'm sorry, but the fact is, I don't actually know what the show is treating this information as. Is it a reveal that's supposed to explain a dynamic or attitude? Are they assuming that we've watched the Book of Boba Fett, that briefly shows us an orbital bombing of Mandalore? In that show, we're focusing on Mando and Bo-Katan, and not Sabine Wren's family, and neither Mando nor Bo-Katan were actually present at that event, so all we get is an orbital sacking. Therefore, if Sabine's parents died in that bombing, and since we are in no way told that or shown that, the fact that we at least know about the sacking of Mandalore changes nothing for some people, like me, who are watching Ahsoka and also might be wondering, as I am, does this reveal, through exposition from Huyang and relatively necessary explanation for Ezra, work well as a reveal to the audience? That Sabine's parents, people who, if you've at least seen Rebels, the audience has spent a bit of time with, they weren't just nameless or faceless characters, and seeing them die might have been an important moment that Rebels fans, like myself, were denied. It was thanks to Sabine's family that members of Phoenix Squadron and a large amount of other rebellion factions were able to evacuate their planet after being discovered by G.A. Thrawn. So, for this show, which I guess is basically Rebels Season 5 live action instead of Ahsoka, if we're being honest, for this show to kill those characters off screen and expect it to affect us in the intended way by dumping it out to a character who just happens to be present and also just happens to be the only one ignorant of this information, apart from us, the audience, and to have that be delivered through a rather stilted and incredibly inept set of lines is almost laughable to me. How does the show want me to feel? I don't get it. Does the show want me to gasp and go, what? Sabine's parents are dead? That's so sad. That's why she's been so grumpy. Well, if that's the case, then it didn't work. All I thought was, well, it would have been nice to see and know that earlier. It would actually work as a foundational setup for a character like Sabine, but for some reason they used it as a reveal in the finale without even having something as simple as Hu Yang maybe talking over very, very brief flashbacks to Ezra like they did it originally, but the contextual flashes, they wouldn't be for Ezra, they would be for us. But they didn't do that. They didn't show us anything, they just told us. And say it with me, people, show, don't tell. And this is another reason why I believe that the writers just seem to care so much less about story structure. They seem to think that if they throw in a conversational delivery and reaction from an ignorant recipient, that will be enough to sell the audience as much as the character, in this case Ezra, on the gravitas of this information. Now that might work for Ezra in the moment, but this reveal should, in this case, be a follow-up conversation to a memory that we, the audience, have of receiving that information from the writers in earlier episodes. But they didn't do that. They did this. And for me, it does not work at all. And the really sad thing is that the writers wouldn't even have to change too much to give us little hints of at least some slightly compelling backstory elements as far as Sabine's current situation and attitude are concerned. The scene in episode 1, where Sabine slightly emotes over the holo message from Ezra, maybe she could have another holo of her blood family, perhaps the last recording her mother made for her before she died. Get Natasha to cry a little bit, shake it off, Mando style, and then you hear Ahsoka's T6 flying over the comms tower, and you can still do the freaking mirrored shot if you want to, who cares. It could go from Sabine wiping away her tears over the mother who gave birth to and raised her, to the sound of the overshadowing arrival of Sabine's mother figure that we later find out in this current narrative of the show, as in the one that we actually got, walked out on Sabine because of her feelings about her family's death, which, to be honest, must have been a massive slap in the face as far as Sabine's concerned. And if you reveal that in earlier episodes, it also, if you must have the Shadow Warrior episode 5 catastrophe of a sequence, make that sequence make more sense, because it tells us immediately that Ahsoka is regularly giving into the fear and would rather walk out on her close friend that needs her guidance at this terrible time in her life than risk training her and apparently possibly getting everyone killed, which is what they try to explore in that very episode but with no previous setup. And all I've done is suggested one or two tiny changes to make that nonsensical sequence in episode 5 that everything in this show randomly seems to hinge on make more sense. So, she smiles at her Ezra holo like she does already, and next to that is a holo of her blood family. The shrugging off of a tear followed by the sound of the mother figure that walked out on her due to that very pain arriving, with that freaking mirrored shot. Easy and yet subtle by Star Wars standards, kind of like the way that they depicted Sabine's time away from the battlefield by simply growing out her hair. You already did that, that was good. What's stopping you from carrying on with similar methods to depict other story elements that you can't be bothered to explain through clunky dialogue or not at all through flashbacks? And if you make this small change, I'm suggesting, it also makes Sabine basically gambling everyone's bloody lives by giving Balin the map less reprehensible from my perspective, and probably from the other characters' perspectives, but it seems like basically no one seems to care about how stupid that was, because having it hammered home that Sabine's family are dead, they were horribly killed after the Galactic Civil War ended, because Moff Gideon decided to be a fecking dick, makes her need to find her brother figure that much more believable, meaning she would make stupid choices that are based entirely on self-interest, because she feels like she has nobody left, that everyone has left her behind, but Ezra actually always had her goddamn back, unlike Ahsoka in most of this show. Would have been nice as well to see Ezra get a little bit mad at the gamble Sabine made to find him, given the sacrifice that he made to help win the war. Wouldn't he see Sabine basically risking everyone's lives to get him home as a pure insult to his sacrifice? Nope. None of that. Just a line, just 1 or 2 lines would have done it. But no. Anyway, Thrawn tracks them down after a relatively uninteresting callback-based conversation between Sabine and Ahsoka. Sabine destroys some fighters, crashes the T-6. Ezra, Sabine, and Ahsoka then head to the Chimera on some howlers to confront Thrawn, who has delayed them to the point that he's all ready to leave, which he does, and Ezra manages to make it on board the Eye of Sion by jumping and Sabine force-pushing him across a really large gap, which I genuinely did enjoy. But Huyang, Sabine, and Ahsoka, along with Baylan, Shin, and a now dead and defeated Morgan Elspeth, wasted potential, are left behind in this new distant galaxy. There's a cool moment where Ezra uses his classic rebel disguise tactic to make it off of the Eye of Sion when he gets back to the Prime Galaxy, and he immediately heads for a New Republic command ship where he's reunited with Hera and Chopper, which was nice, I suppose. Oh, and there's a cool moment of Baylan standing on the outstretched arm of a massive statue reminiscent of statues depicted in Lord of the Rings, and we end on a nice shot of Anakin watching over Ahsoka, Sabine, Huyang, and the Noti tribe in his spirit form just before the series cuts to credits. Oh, and like I and most others predicted, the Great Mothers basically have a zombie army now. Nice. How wonderful. Hey. You know how I ranted last week about the fact that they should have just asked the Star Whales right from the start, and this whole plot was basically a waste of time and they could have been doing better things with that time?
Yes?
Well, I noticed something else that didn't actually come to light in the finale, but in episode 3. But when I watched the finale, I was reminded of it. Morgan states that her ancestors were among the first to ride the creatures in the days before time was counted, blah blah blah. Then if Thrawn is so desperate to get home, and has a seemingly ridiculous amount of favour with the Great Mothers, which we've mentioned already, why the hell didn't he just ask the Great Mothers to ask some Purrgil to wrap their tentacles around Thrawn's ship and take him and them back to the Prime Galaxy in exactly the same way that he was exiled? Since they're all so desperate to leave for some reason, if they can call across dreams and time and space, then surely they must have some kind of Purrgil Uber service in there somewhere. I mean, I get that Thrawn himself wouldn't be able to order a freaking Star Whale taxi, but if all they've been doing for 9 bloody years is apparently not doing a cargo transfer that takes 3 days, surely a genius like Thrawn might have suggested something like that at some point. But no. They need the Eye of Sauron. The Eye of Sion. When we have Star Whales capable of wrapping their tentacles around entire star cruisers and towing them in hyperspace, far enough that they go to another galaxy. And Thrawn seems to be hanging out with these 3 magic women who would definitely know how to tame a pod of Purrgil. Oh god, you could have had a bunch of benevolent Purrgil going against a bunch of night-sistered evil-ass Purrgil, all with green eyes or something like that. It makes way more sense, would have been a lot faster, and would have looked a lot cooler if you just used the stuff you've already created properly, Dave Filoni. You made Tales of the Jedi, you made Clone Wars, you made Rebels, and using these established characters to tell new and interesting Star Wars stories while remaining faithful to their origins isn't exactly that difficult if you just use what you've made in the past wisely in order to benefit your current stories properly. Flashing back to Ahsoka's time with the Rakshir, or maybe Sabine confides in Ahsoka about her parents, and then Ahsoka shares one of her earliest memories, or they both do. Dave, you've already made what you need to reference and carry these current characters forward. You do not need to be constantly wasting time mirroring shots from the original trilogy like Emperor Palpatine's lightning will strike you down if you don't. Or make different dialogue choices that actually get us invested in the story instead of rehashing things that don't need to be rehashed, and also rehash the stuff that does for this current story to make any sense, whether that be Ahsoka's self-contained motivations or revealing the death of Sabine's parents tastefully at an earlier point, to the point where it elevates the story in the finale as opposed to it being incredibly distracting and not very convincing. And look, maybe Filoni is just making what he wants to make, and the thing is, it seems to be working. Most fans love it. There's nothing but praise at the moment for the simplest and most surface-level derision of what Star Wars used to be. In the show's worst episode, episode 5, not in terms of spectacle, but in terms of common freaking sense, Filoni has managed to grab an entire fandom by the nutsack with the sound of Vader's breathing, Hayden with a red Vader lightsaber, 2 pairs of yellow Sith eyes, and a few threatening repeating phrases that seemed to set the fan base on fire. And yet nobody seemed to notice what was actually burning. You know, the souls of more coherent and more intrinsically foundational storytellers, at least the ones who can't stop adoring Star Wars no matter how much it continues to disappoint them in recent years. But the great thing about my personal perspective is that none of what I've just said diminishes the original trilogy, or the prequels, or Rebels, or Clone Wars, or Tales of the Jedi. They are also really good. And the last 3 were made by the same person who made this, which means he is more than capable and hopefully just dropped the ball on this one. Because what he was trying to do here, and the way that he was trying to do it and present it, really just didn't make a lot of sense. And as I said, small changes could have been made to make a lot of this seem less stupid than it's coming across. And nobody from the writer's room, to the table read, to the shooting days, to the editing room, to the test audiences, if any, nobody seemed to think anyone would freaking notice. Well, some of us noticed. And we're not happy.
You doing okay there?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just
what? I mean, you ended that breakdown pretty abruptly. You were doing very well, and then all of a sudden you just entered a breakdown of a different kind.
I know. I just went into rant mode all of a sudden.
A surface-level derision of what Star Wars used to be? That's a pretty quick turnaround.
I know, right?
Who hurt you, my darling? What happened?
Nothing happened. That is actually exactly the point.
Well, no, quite a lot of stuff did happen.
Yes, love, stuff did happen, and some of it I enjoyed, and we've been over that. But taken together, its foundations for occurrence are shaky at best, and I'm sorry, but other than Ezra and Anakin's action sequences, Ahsoka always seems like she's fighting underwater. And I'm not including the metaphorical significance of episode 5, where she actually is technically underwater and fighting Anakin. I'm not including that. I don't know if this is a choreography issue, or that she can't really move properly when she's got her Mithrandir Pashmina hanging over her shoulders while holding 2 lightsabers. Maybe it's the weight of the sabers themselves. I only mentioned it briefly when I came down from my previous rant, but there's a particular fight scene between Ahsoka and Shadow Morgan that is either a testament to how proficient and fluid Diana Inosanto is with weapons and in fight scenes in general. I mean, she is a martial artist after all. Or a testament to how impractical those lightsaber props are compared to the blade that Shadow Morgan is using. Being a martial artist, I guess that Diana would have at least some input into the design and feel of the blade, given that she herself was going to actually be using it in the sequence. But it also puts on show how slow Ahsoka is compared to Morgan, despite the fact that Ahsoka won the fight and freaking killed her. And many times this series, I've been shouting at the TV going, why is everyone so bloody slow, particularly Sabine and Ahsoka? Half the time they fight like their socks have come off inside their boots, and they're mildly uncomfortable in an unexpected way, and therefore distracted and not fighting at their best. It's so strange. I should not be shouting, pull your socks up, or freaking jump higher, you can jump higher and further than that, or don't use your hands to lever out the map, Ahsoka, are you kidding me? And, you know, Sabine's obviously going to take the map when you give it to her, so put a tracker on it and leave sooner and learn a different and more interesting lesson. Or, the thing that I was shouting the most throughout this entire series, just ask the whales, you freaking morons! Ahsoka and Thrawn, both utter morons. And that's another thing, though Lars Mikkelsen's performance never ceases to be absolutely perfect, like I said in the last episode of The Tale's End, what these characters are given to work with is really shaky some of the time. Luckily, while not detracting from their actual performances, also some of the time, but especially in Lars Mikkelsen's case, because he is doing what the script demands and doing that well. But the story being told makes Thrawn look rather stupid. Again, I have no idea why, if Thrawn has the favour of the Great Mothers, who can obviously talk to Purrgil if they can hijack personal force connections and use that to locate the freaking sender or receiver, why he doesn't just put two and two together. Like, how has it taken a tactical genius like him 9 years to not even actually arrive at that obvious conclusion or possible option? It's utterly bizarre. Like, to call across time and space, to pull a blade from another dimension, to bestow seemingly a huge amount of power onto another being and not even break a sweat, to call across space and time to the dreams of a child of Dathomir, but not be able to be a space whale liaison for a one-way trip back to the Prime Galaxy, ending your exile much sooner and not actually having to rely on dreams of someone in another galaxy that will hopefully have the means to build a hyperspace ring and travel to another galaxy, dock your ship, and then bring you back. Yeah, that's a much more solid plan than just ordering a freaking taxi. To quote a YouTuber I very much admire, Thrawn is a stupid person's idea of what a smart person should be. And I think stupid is a tad strong, but I know what he's getting at. And to quote another YouTuber I also very much admire, and a fellow countryman of mine, this show's main villain was given every resource and advantage he could possibly ask for, and should have pulled off an easy win, but somehow managed to squander every single one with absolutely zero impact, and yet still smugly acted as if he'd come out on top. Agreed, but I suppose Thrawn did actually get back to the place where he was intending to get back to. However, given the other more sensible manners through which he could have arrived back a lot earlier, given what I previously mentioned, I think the second quote more refers to the sequence where basically every gun on the Chimera is firing down at 3 Jedi on Howlers, and nothing seems to hit them. I was expecting, maybe even hoping, that they'd get slightly injured, knocked out, or something, but regardless, the protagonist's plot armor makes the antagonist look incompetent. Also, Ahsoka needing to go on a journey of enlightenment, we all know how I feel about that sequence, to ultimately receive enough common sense to remember it's a good idea to ask the Purrgil for help, just doesn't make Ahsoka, Sabine, or Thrawn look very smart. Or the Great Mothers, come to think of it. So not many of the characters in this show are particularly clever. I keep shouting at them for doing stupid things. And in terms of tactics where all characters are concerned, I feel like, despite the fact that they're supposed to be more mature but not elderly versions of characters that have been important to me for nearly a decade at this point, characters who are smart people, by the way, I feel like I barely know these people in this show, because a large amount of the, I believe, directed portrayals of these characters means that their personalities don't come across properly, certainly not in the dialogue that's written for them to say, which means that these just don't yet, at least, feel like the people that Filoni created in animated form. So I can't shrug off the stupid things that they do in this show now, if they're supposed to be the same characters who didn't do this same stupid stuff years earlier. Maybe that makes no sense, but God, my head is starting to hurt now.
Okay. Is there anything else you, actually did like?
Well, my favourite episode, as it turns out, was episode 6 overall, with the introduction of Peridia, intergalactic hyperspace, Thrawn's introduction, basically anything Baylan said or did I found highly intriguing, and I'm wondering what the solution will be in terms of further exploring his character. I think it would be, I don't know, I'm not quite sure why I think this, but I think it would be a bit of a crime to recast him, to be honest. If it were me, I would group Shin's journey of self-discovery and Baylan's quest for the cycle of power, or the quest to end it, together somehow. Maybe have Shin search for Balin and not find him exactly, but find what he might have been looking for, and may have actually even found himself, so that you can still keep that interesting storyline passed down to Shin, while still honouring the importance and uniqueness of that character, while also hopefully honouring Ray Stevenson's final performance, one that he sadly never got to see the final version of, rather than recasting and possibly doing the character a disservice. I don't know, I just feel like recasting is a bad idea. Having the final shot of Balin looking out from the statue to the distant mountain, and him walking towards it and then it cutting away, that being the last time we see him, while sad but also very, very beautiful, it gives the writers a chance to play with the legend of Balin's skull, the most interesting character in Star Wars, Ahsoka. I really hope they do him justice. Before we get to the cabaret Q&A, let me at least attempt to bring some, let's call it, bittersweet balance back to the Force, in the way that Anakin eventually did. He just needed to spend some time being nice, then being an asshole for quite a while, and then being nice again, and returning balance to the Force, and saving his children's lives, albeit in the wake of a tyrannical empire that he was instrumental in creating, but hey, baby steps. I've been floundering, if I'm honest, between the two sides of the critical conflict, my own little saying that refers to the light and dark side of Star Wars criticism. And I suppose I've also been hanging in between at the same time. I've enjoyed doing relative deep dives into episodes of a show that explore a universe I adore so much, diving into narrative and occasional meta or behind the scenes explanations to explain the hidden meanings behind this show. But I hope I've also shed some light on some of the flaws in this show that are, to me, unhidden, like the things that I personally just couldn't ignore, just couldn't not see. I'm going to be real, if they had just called this show Star Wars Rebels Season 5, brackets live action, I would take back some of my criticisms, but they didn't, so I will stand by them. If we look at this show and the way that the story was told, the pacing, the contrived plot points, it tells us, or at least tells me, that one of the big points that they wanted to get to was the World Between Worlds sequence with Anakin in Episode 5, and that they tried to just create a plot that led up to that point that, as I've gone into, has shaky as hell foundations and lacks focus and relevance. But if Episode 4 and 5 were Ahsoka-focused episodes of a series called Rebels Season 5, and you were focusing on other characters before and after, it wouldn't actually matter what the circumstances are for her showing up in the World Between Worlds and fighting her master, because as long as she's having some kind of existential crisis, that's enough to shove her off a cliff and have her meet Hayden in another realm. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's like the writers came up with that sequence and thought, we need to find a way to get her there, and then everything else followed, or if you like, came before. You see what I mean? I'm saying basically that Ahsoka the character wasn't the point of Ahsoka the show, and I therefore believe that this being a live-action Rebels revival with a few changes at the top of the series would have gone a long way to convincing the Sith Lords of the Star Warsian criticism world, online creators who I am reluctantly beginning to bow to, that this show was worth their time. Maybe Disney thought that it would be too jarring for us Rebels fans to switch from animation to live action, even though the vast majority of us would have been absolutely fine. Also, the show's been off air for a while now. But no, they panicked and used Ahsoka, the character, as a vehicle and a tool, not just to set up future movies that Disney hope will deflect attention away from the sequel trilogy, but also as a favoured marketing option. Rather than calling the show Ahsoka and then deciding to actually do a study on the character of Ahsoka. Marketing the 5th, but also first, live-action season of a show some may not have watched would have been harder than marketing a show that gives us the illusion of just studying one character. But when you watch the show, a large amount of the time the only thing that it succeeds at is calling back to the 4-year run of Rebels. How many times did I have to go off on asides in, this episode of The Tale's End and the last one, filling in blanks to make shots and lines in Ahsoka make more sense and land with more weight. I mean, I lost count. Same with a lot of other Ahsoka heavy material like Clone Wars. And so if you're going to do that anyway, why not just call this show what it is? Rebels Season 5. But it's a clunky season because it's attempting course correction from its own original idea, which I believe was the Shadow Warrior sequence. I don't believe that the sequence was conceived in the original context of an Ahsoka show. I bet that when Filoni came up with the World Between Worlds concept, which by the way is an homage to the Wood Between Worlds from Narnia, he pretty soon had the idea, after using that realm to save Ahsoka, that it would be cool if Ahsoka and Anakin could fight in this realm, but it would be cooler if it was a mix of Vader and Anakin, etc. And that episode 5 sequence came into his head. But it maybe wasn't as important to him how Ahsoka actually got there, just that the sequence happened. And maybe I'm wrong, but even so, I'll take another similar gamble, that if they had actually done an animated 5th season of Rebels, it might have looked similar to what this Ahsoka show later became. Instead, what it became, thanks in part to its shaky setup, which stemmed from the desire of a writer actually maybe wanting to tell a different story from the beginning, was a good enough spectacle, but ultimately a mess of wasted potential for what could have been an interesting new start and introductory exploration of a beloved character. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this, and maybe you could argue from another perspective that one of the things Star Wars is all about, from the OT up to now, is being thrown into the middle of a galactic war, and you just kind of have to work out who everyone is and what's going on. The OT did that brilliantly. Some would say that the prequels did it less brilliantly, but still pretty well. And what you were being thrown in the middle of was explored and explained in a much more compelling and ultimately convincing way than this was, especially in terms of story structure. So having to just work out what's going on, if you have no previous context, like none of us did before we'd watched our first Star Wars movie, works fine if the story is told well. But being thrown into what we were thrown into, in Ahsoka in this case, in order to convey what they were trying to convey, despite the fact that I had spent a good 2 weeks before the double episode premiere rewatching basically everything so that I'd have all the information I needed, and despite the fact that I enjoyed that process, it still didn't help to explain, convincingly, the supposed and rushed, but also occasionally painfully slow arc that Ahsoka's character goes on in this series. Despite all that context, despite us knowing the character from the very first year of her life, the story of this show, which shares her name, still doesn't make enough sense. Which also seems to prove that even though Star Wars has become obsessed with referring to itself every 5 seconds, at least in this case, it's unfortunately forgotten how to do it right. Final note on this new galaxy. I mean, I mentioned earlier that the samurai-inspired warriors that Shin teams up with remind me of the Tuscans on Tatooine, which is the first planet, of course, that we ever see in Star Wars. This tells me 3 things. 1, it is being used as a reminder that we are all still in the same universe unnecessarily. 2, that possibly the Tusken Raiders and these Peridian Raiders share some common history, maybe even ancestry, but given both of the cultures' ultimately primitive nature, I'm not sure how that would be possible right offhand, but there are ways. I mean, they could have been somehow escorted by a third party long ago. And if they do share history, did it begin on Tatooine or Peridia? Now, the first point on this list is what my critical eye sees. The second point is a result of what my Star Warsian critical eye is showing me. And the third one, which I'm about to close on, I see as an odd combination of the two. And that, I suppose, is what the last 2 episodes of The Tale's End have been largely about. This strange mixture of love and despair that has allowed me to form the opinions laid out in these reviews. So, 3, if they are trying to convey that it's the same universe, as suggested in point 1, that's unnecessary, in my opinion, for the audience. But it could also mean that the first thing the writers thought of when they decided to take Star Wars to a new galaxy was to have little reminders of the first planet that we ever see in Star Wars. And as a first impression of apparent new directions overall, I suppose I get what they were going for, but that doesn't seem very new to me. When I initially saw the new galaxy reveal on my first viewing, I felt hope, genuine hope. But upon a rewatch of the whole series, when the new galaxy came back around, I didn't feel hope. I just thought the words, "Oh, A New Hope." And I really don't think that that's the same thing, despite this show's obsessions and intentions. It seems that this apparent course correction has just looped back around. But maybe I'm wrong. Alrighty then, thanks for listening. Time for a quick Q&A. Ciao! So, this time around, I'm going to be answering questions submitted by Creed5861. So thank you very much for, again, reaching out. My antivirus software has just jumped up mid-recording. That's not supposed to happen. Anyway, so there's two questions. I know it seems like the question lists are getting shorter each episode, but I've started bullet pointing these answers in a little bit of a more detailed way, and in terms of things that I have to cover, especially the second question, there's quite a lot, so it's more about what we have time for than how many questions we can do month to month, depending on what the questions are. But anyway, question one. Can you give us any hints about Season 3 of VC? That will become clear over the Christmas period, but most likely Vicious Cabaret after this month's Halloween special and next month's season finale will be likely returning in March, I think, of 2024. Can't reveal too much about Season 3 in terms of events, since Season 2 is not yet actually over, but we're going to be doing probably a lot more format experimentation in terms of the way some of the stories are told, and season and episode length. Also, I mean, I suppose what I could tell you about Season 3 that is a definite is the title of Season 3, the kind of overhanging title. Because every season of Vicious Cabaret does have a title. Season 1 is called Sirens of the Soul, and obviously there's an episode in Season 1, Episode 3, with the same name. Season 2 is called Vignettes of the Soul, although I will admit that when I came up with that title at the beginning of Season 1, the stories were supposed to come out shorter, so they didn't exactly end up vignettes, but I like that title and I stuck to it, so that's what it was called. But in terms of Season 3, the title is No Great Loss. This is actually taken from one of my favourite chapters in one of Stephen King's very, very large, particularly large novels, The Stand. Very, very, very long book. And, you know, there are some chapters in that book which, you know, sometimes they don't go anywhere, but you're just as engaged, or at least I was. Sometimes they're just, you know, they're only a couple of pages. Sometimes they're, you know, 50 pages long, but they follow a character that you never meet again. And then sometimes, like in this chapter, I can't remember the number of the chapter. I think it's in the 20s. It's in the 20s, I believe. Or in the teens or 20s. I can't remember. But anyway, it's about, I suppose it is, I suppose since we were talking about vignettes of the soul, I suppose that the chapter in this book is a series of vignettes about narratively inconsequential characters in the world of The Stand that are dealing with this superflu epidemic world that, you know, is being presented in the book. You know, we follow victims of past horrible crimes, or drug addicts, or children who have lost their parents, or vulnerable people who end up meeting kind of horrible demises. And some of these people are vulnerable, but also some of them are pretty detestable and horrible to begin with. So sometimes when they meet these bizarre and sudden endings, there would be 3 words at the end of that specific vignette that would say, "No great loss." And so I'm not saying that No Great Loss as a title is just going to be that and a bunch of short stories about vulnerable people meeting horrible demises. That's not what I'm going for in season 3. When I saw those 3 words, kind of like the 3, I suppose, I don't know whether it's a 3-word thing that I have, but things like First Time Again, No Great Loss, there are certain things that kind of just speak to me and make me go, oh, that would be a really, really great title, because in terms of the way I am seeing those words and what those words mean to me, and the themes of the story that I'm trying to tell in season 3, and, you know, how it relates to that, it kind of made my brain explode, and I was like, that's so bizarre that that could mean what it means in this context. And so, yeah, that was the inspiration for the title, and that is something that's unshakable. That title is not changing because it works so perfectly. And, you know, within season 3, you guys listening out there will get to find out why. And me writing will get to explore more reasons as to why. Because, you know, there's a couple of reasons that I have off the top of my head that I won't explain because it'll give too much away. But also, I'm sure that when I start exploring stories within this season, that there are going to be other things that come up where I'm going to go, oh, maybe that was a reason too. So, yeah, that's all I can really tell you at the moment about season 3, March of 2024, No Great Loss. So stay tuned for that. Obviously, season 2 will be ending before then, so stay tuned for that first. But yeah, stay tuned for season 3 in March. Question 2. I love this question. What's it been like juggling VC and The Tale's End so far in terms of fiction versus narrative analysis? Awesome question. Thank you so much, Creed5861. Research time has skyrocketed, even if it's something that I know about, like Star Wars or The Walking Dead, and also about making sure I don't miss anything. And also, kind of annoyingly, deciding what to skip over or miss intentionally, so I don't end up, in terms of certain relative deep dives, just going through the show line by line and shot for shot. So knowing what to say and what not to say about something, or what to refer to and what not to refer to, and also what you might be saying by not saying something or not referring to something. It can make your head hurt a little bit. And also, I suppose mostly, I feel like it is 2 different sides of the brain, even if it's not, because I'm using my knowledge and skills as a creator when I'm critiquing something in order to explore the points I'm trying to make and explore the criticisms that I have. If I was just doing one or the other, in terms of if I was just doing media analysis or just doing fiction, maybe my head wouldn't hurt so much, but I am, and so whether I have the right to, or whether I even enjoy pointing out flaws in stories written by people more successful than myself, or who get to write things nowadays that are supposed to, and more often than not do, entertain me. But I think that's why I choose to only really talk about things that I have a lot of emotional and personal stake in, like The Walking Dead, or Star Wars, or in the future, say, Doctor Who, or Star Trek, or Patrick Stewart's new book. You know, I've been following Sir Patrick Stewart's work all of my life, as far as I can remember, pre-Star Trek, pre-X-Men. I come from a theatre performance family, and so the time that Sir Patrick spent in the Royal Shakespeare Company, the RSC, before and after his claims to fame in TV and movies was hugely inspiring to me. But my point is that my criticisms, even if it doesn't sound like it at the time, are always coming from a place of love and time spent with the subject in question. And especially with Star Wars, it's difficult for me to harbour and throw so much criticism for and at something that my own fictional show takes so many cues and inspirations from. It sometimes makes me question the legitimacy and quality of my own skills as a storyteller. But every time I say something like that in a conversation, particularly recently to friends and family who have been listening to seasons 1 and 2 of Vicious Cabaret, and also listened to me complain about how much Ahsoka as a show has disappointed me, and then heard me on the phone or, over a drink, for example, compare these two worries and say things like, does my show have the same foundational issues? By taking cues and inspirations from this, and this, have I written myself into the same corners? Am I as creatively bankrupt as I'm worried Star Wars is becoming? And, I'm paraphrasing here, but broadly, the answer has been stop talking crap. You're either spending time analysing and writing about something that you were inspired by and writing your show, which Star Wars, in this case, among many other things, inspired, and because they're both sci-fi, at the moment you're locked into thinking that they share similarities, and so they therefore may share the same problems. But that's the great thing about coming to the end of an analysis of something like Ahsoka. The project itself has made me realise that in terms of how I structure what I create, and what I therefore wouldn't have done if I was given the responsibility of writing and directing Ahsoka, Vicious Cabaret and Star Wars, at least current Star Wars, do not share enough similarities in terms of structure and delivery, and therefore also, I hope, do not share the same problems. And maybe that what I do occasionally view as course correction in my own work can be seen for what it is. And that it's okay to acknowledge that you've messed up, looking at you, Sequel Trilogy. That it's a good idea to embark in new directions and make corrections for past creative mistakes. And the realization of the need for course correction within the confines of any universe shows growth within the people creating that universe, and growth within the universe itself. However, I've also learned, as a lot of us are learning these days, that big budget is no reflection on quality, and that it's all very well, like I just said, recognizing the need for overall universal narrative course correction, but at the end of the day, it's also all about foundation, execution, and effective and appropriate presentation. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this tale to an end. Damn, I'm having a lot of fun doing this show. I'm going to start putting little announcements before and after VC episodes so that people who aren't as active on social media have more of an idea of what's coming in the next show, which in this case will be at the end of next month in November, before or alongside the season finale, depending on how things go. I've got it narrowed down to a short list of Daryl Dixon, Sir Patrick Stewart's new book, Making It So, or David Tennant and Catherine Tate's Doctor Who return, depending on how the dates match up. So let me know on social media, link below, or via email, which you'd like more or sooner. We'll get to all of them in time, but the great thing is that you, wonderful people out there, can take a measurable amount of control in terms of what we cover when. Again, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. To us. Whatever. And as always, it's been nice talking to you.
If you're a podcast clown like I am, you must have dreamed about starting your own. Let me tell you, my dreadful darlings, it's never easy, but it's one of the best decisions I ever made. It was either that or waste away in my own subjective ascendance. Of course, it can be more than just a little overwhelming to know how to get started. Buzzsprout can help you launch your podcast professionally and in style, linking you with all of the major podcasting platforms such as Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and much, much more. Join us up in the buzzing, sprouting podcast cloud to breathe in the renowned analytical sound of the accurate analysis and promotion tools provided. Follow the link in the show notes below to start your journey and receive a $20 Amazon gift card. We're waiting for you. Buzzsprout, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast.